Hey everybody, today I'm going to be talking to you about this new to me Mamiya 6 Automat camera. And let me just pop it open. Isn't that cool looking? These are really neat cameras. I'm going to do a full video on this particular camera, talking about how it works and its operation at some point. But for right now, I have to get the rangefinder calibrated so I can take it out shooting. Two things you're going to need for testing the focus of a camera is a piece of ground glass and a powerful loop. You're going to put the ground glass on the film plane of your camera and put the shutter on bulb, open it up, point it at something, focus it on the ground glass and use the loop right on the surface of the ground glass so that you can get right in there and make sure it's absolutely perfectly focused. And then you're going to work on calibrating whatever you're trying to calibrate. There are other techniques that are above my pay grade. What I'm doing here is I took the ground glass, put it on the film plane of my camera, and I set up a piece of sheet music on the wall, so like 6 feet away, and I focused it so that I could read the tiniest text that I could read using the loop on the ground glass. And that said, everything is spot on. If I took a photo, the photo would be good. At that point, now I can worry about, does the rangefinder patch line up the way it should? And that's really all what the rest of this video is about is, okay, once I know what truth is, how do I adjust that rangefinder patch in the Mamiya 6 Automat that I have? Let's get to it. What I want to accomplish right now is I'm going to take the top off of the camera because I want to get a closer look at the rangefinder to be able to adjust it. Right now, when I put ground glass at the film plane and set it to infinity, I saw that the camera was focusing very nicely at infinity when I hit the stop, but when I look through the rangefinder and focus on something at infinity, it actually seems to be focusing around the 30-foot mark here. And so I have just a little bit more, just a skosh. What that tells me is that the rangefinder patch is not exactly aligned with reality. So let's see, how do we adjust the rangefinder patch? There's a little screw right here. And if you take that screw out, then you can put a screwdriver in and adjust the one screw that I think that adjusts the rangefinder patch. With that said, I took the screw out before and I couldn't quite find exactly what I was doing inside. I think it's much better to know what's under the hood before I try to blindly change it through a little hole like this. The instructions for removing the top are pretty clear. There's another video that a guy put together, a pretty good one, where he shows taking everything apart. There's one little hitch. He has a different model of the Automat, and you'll notice on his, there's a little lever right here. Mine doesn't have that lever. I think this is a later version. And if you look at the difference between his video and what I'm going to do, you'll notice that there's a big spring underneath here that's not present in his video, and that sort of complicates things. I think that has to do with resetting the frame counter. It's not a big issue. I did this earlier and I was able to successfully get the camera back together, so let's do it again. What we're going to do is there's actually only a few things to take apart. We have to take these two screws out, then this mechanism's going to come off. Mine's going to come off in multiple pieces because of the old glue is worn out on this plastic viewing screen. Then there's a single big screw in the center. We're going to take that out. Then we're going to come over here. We're going to take this knob off, and there's two screws, one here and one here. We're going to take those screws off. And finally, we're going to have to address the spring that the guy in the other video didn't have to deal with. Once we have all those things taken care of, the top lifts right off. And that just lifted off as a unit. That's nice. And see, we've got this little black screw in the center. We'll take that one out. This knob is very easy to take off. You just turn it in the opposite direction from the arrow. It comes right off. So this is what I was talking about. You see, there's a screw right here. And then there's the end of a spring. And we're going to need to take this little metal ring out and unhook that end of that spring. And you see, we can pull these coils of the spring. It's a big, giant, loose spring. So all we need to do is get a coil out, and now we can take that off. This is something that the other Automat, the older Automat, doesn't have. And when we go to put the camera back together, this spring will be very easy to kind of shove back under here. Let's get these two screws out. And the lid comes right off. Now, remember I told you the spring was going to be an issue, so we just take the lid off. And this is the shutter button. So this is the whole mechanism that the cable release works on. So you got our cable release here. And when you screw the cable release into the shutter button, see what's going to happen when you press the end of the cable release. That's it. So the shutter button itself stays motionless as the end of the cable release pushes inside and pushes this inner button. Pretty clever. That's how the cable release mechanism works. But if you're not using a cable release, your finger pushes on the outer button and the whole thing goes inside and releases the shutter. Notice that this has, on one side, there's a flat, this angular piece. Thanks to the guy who did the video of the other Automat Disassembly, you have to make sure that that angled flat, when you go to reassemble the camera, that has to be right up against the distance wheel so that this little flange is not resting on the distance wheel. Let me put this in here, I'll show you what I mean. It has to go like that so that the button can pass the distance wheel. If you twist it like that, you could actually have the flange resting on top of the distance wheel. You don't want that. So that's why they have that little cutout. So during reassembly, it's going to be important to make sure that that corner is aligned properly. Okay, time to take a closer look at this mechanism here. See that? See what's happening? You can see that in here. There's a cam, a brass cam right here. And that cam is being rotated by this thumb wheel as I'm focusing the camera. You see that? And the brass cam is actually moving this lever right here. This long lever is riding on the brass cam, and you see that it's actually acting on this little thing here, which I'm poking at with a screwdriver. And that, the thing that I was poking at with the screwdriver, controls the position of the rangefinder mechanism. In order to make adjustments to the position of the rangefinder patch, all we need to do is, see if we can get this to focus right here. right there. There's a screw, and it's going to adjust the point that my screwdriver is pointing at. See down here, here's the contact point. You want that to be a little further or a little nearer from the lever tip. It's going to be adjusted using this small screw right here. And that's the screw that we are actually trying to adjust when we poke through that little hole. And let me just see something here. That explains why I had issues when I tried to adjust it through the hole in the lid. It needs a smaller screwdriver. First thing you have to do before you start trying to adjust that rangefinder patch is to make sure the infinity setting is correct. And if it's not, then there's a lot more work you need to do with shims and stuff. So I just turned the adjusting wheel until it was at the infinity stop, and I took it outside and I looked with ground glass at distant tree branches, and I could see it was absolutely in crisp focus. So the infinity stop is correct. I just finished doing what I hope was a good job of aligning the rangefinder patch with reality on this camera. The way I did that was I opened the back of the camera. We'll pop this little lever up here, and I've already taken out the pressure plate, little metal thing that slides out here. And what I'm going to do here is put a piece of ground glass, this, I found it on eBay, 6 centimeter by 6 centimeter piece of ground glass with the ground side facing the lens, right in the film plane there. Made a little note to myself saying that first thing, use the wheel, focus the ground glass, and then use this little loop, put it right on the ground glass, and make sure the image is absolutely crisp. And then once that's crisp, then I have to turn this wheel to get the rangefinder patch aligned. And what I found out was if I turn this wheel, the thumb wheel, to the right to correct the offset, then that means to fix that I have to turn the little screw clockwise, which will pull this arm a little bit towards me. I had to write that down, otherwise I wasn't going to know the right way to adjust this. So at the end, I ended up turning this little screw clockwise I think it was like maybe a half turn or 3/4 of a turn. And that brought everything into alignment. Knowing that my infinity stop was correct, I decided to simply put a piece of sheet music on the wall about 6 feet away and use that as a target for me to focus my camera on. And I would use the ground glass and the loop in order to make sure I could read text absolutely crisp that was on the sheet music. And then I could use the vertical parts in the sheet music with the rangefinder patch in order to see how far off that was. And again, I just made like a 3/4 of a turn adjustment, and that brought everything into alignment. I went out and checked my infinity setting, and that was in alignment as well. So I think right now I can trust the rangefinder patch to accurately focus camera. Now let's close it back up. Remember I told you that this particular camera has the spring over here that the earlier version of the Automat does not have. This little coiled up spring. Right now it's coiled up inside the frame counter. And we just need to make sure that we hook that in the appropriate place when we put the cover back on. And I'll show you that in a minute. And remember, we need to get the shutter button, put the pieces back together, and there's that slanted part that has to be facing towards the distance wheel. And it turns out that this is not going to get out of position once we put the lid on. Look what happens when you put this in. You see how it sits in there? There is a flat on the front side of the camera, and so that metal plate is not going to twist at all. The lid is holding it in alignment. We just need to make sure that this goes on correctly first. You want the spring to be fed through the lid. So kind of stretch it out and all right, there we go. And we just kind of pull a few coils through like that. And we've got everything else lined up. Let's get our screws all in place. Might as well close up the back of the camera. We don't need it to be open. And there's these two screws here. Now what remains is we're going to put that cover plate on over here on the side with the scale, and we've got the knob to go over here. But before we do the knob, we have this little piece, and this is going to hold the spring in place. And what we need to do is get that spring hooked inside. You'll see there's a small inner hole, and you want the spring hooked on that inner hole like that. And then you can manually kind of feed the spring back in through the top. You can thread it in. So we're going to just do this, get the spring kind of threaded back in there. Like that. See? We've got the spring, I've got it in there, and now we turn this ring clockwise until we've got it lined up the way it was. And it looks like all these holes are here so you can clock it to whichever direction is needed to get the right tension on the spring. I'm just going to leave it like this because that's the way I found it. And there. Now we're going to put this part back in place. Looking good. And now if I was careful, this whole setup is ready to go. All the parts have stayed together, and I can screw these little screws in. And they don't go in deep. Just like a turn and a half each. There we go. Last screw that needs to go in is, I took this one out. Let me just close this lens. I took this one out earlier. This is the one that covers up the secret access hole for the adjustment for the rangefinder. All right, just so you know, you probably want to take the lid off if you want to make these adjustments, because the screwdriver that takes this screw out, which is this one, has a wider blade than the screwdriver that fits the little screw that's in there. So you really want to get the lid off so you can inspect things. Blow the dust bunnies out while you're in there. And just make sure everything runs. It does. I'm going to release the frame counter. Let's make sure the frame counter goes up to frame 1. There we are, we're at frame 1. We're cocked. And there we go, frame 1. Frame 2. Frame number 12. And this should start freewheeling. A little red dot showing that the film is done. And now, as soon as I open the back, this little red dot should go away. There we go. And the frame counter reset itself. That tells us that that little spring is working just right. We don't need to adjust its tension. Everything's good. With any luck, I've got this awesome little medium format camera all tuned up and ready to go. All I need to do now is take it out and shoot a few rolls of 120 film and see if I come home with blurry photos or not. So that's all I got for you today. Thank you for watching, and go out and shoot a roll.